Sure. I mean, it's been out there for the last 4 months on what our campaign's about. This campaign's about the future. It's not about the past. It's about new and fresh ideas, not old and stale ideas. And it's about putting people ahead of party and politics. And it's about sending somebody down to D.C. who has been in the private sector as well as served as military and understands the economy. And wants to make sure that the reason I'm running is I started my career serving 9 years in the military as a pilot and the aircraft carrier pilot and a SEAL. And I've got 16 years of private sector experience. And I've got 4 young kids that are 13, 12, 10, and 8. And I'm just concerned that, I had a lot of opportunities when I was young. My parents came here a year before I was born, so from Colombia. I learned Spanish first, but I had a lot of opportunities when I was young. And I just don't think that if we continue on the same path we're on right now, my kids and everybody else's kids are not going to have the same chances I had. I just don't think it's fair.
Why do you think that things have changed so radically?
I think part of it is that the partisanship down in D.C. has gotten so bad because we've gotten so many more and more career politicians, people that go down there for the right reason initially, and the longer they're down there, I think undoubtedly, just by human nature, they get tied up into the special interests, the lobby groups, and they lose focus of why they got sent down there in the first place. And that's to serve the people, not their party or the special interests of the lobbying groups. And they become so ideologically rigid that they can't see past their party and do what's right. If you see what's going on down in D.C. right now, there are a number of big issues that are being addressed right now. And the only way any of these issues and the other ones coming up forward after that are going to get done is through bipartisanship. It's not going to get done by people who have been partisan their whole career. You've got the Gang of 8 working on immigration reform. I want to make it the Gang of 9. You've got the expanded background check to Manchin bill that didn't pass. Only 4 Republicans voted on that. Senator Collins, Senator McCain, Senator Toomey, and Senator Kirk. I want to make sure when I get down there that we get to 60. But it's going to take getting more Republicans as well as getting the conservative Democrats to come together on that. My party hasn't been there on gay marriage overall. I favor repealing DOMA, but I also feel, that if 2 people are in love, they should be able to get married, and we need to work, as a party on that, as well as work together across both lines. And sure. And there's going to be other issues that are going to come forward. I think there's going to be an opportunity to work on a grand bargain with the economy. And there's no way any of that stuff's going to get done unless you reach across the aisle and be bipartisan. And I think it's time to get new and fresh ideas down in D.C. Fresh ideas from experiences, not just from the military, but also from the private sector. So that people understand how the economy works before they actually start implementing these legislations, which in theory, some of these legislations are good in theory, but when you look at everything that's put into them, because they're done by basically people who have not been in the private sector, then the realities start to hit in once they get passed and once they get implemented into the private sector. So,
can I ask you, I think you probably come to know that getting elected requires fundraising.
yep.
So what, if fundraising is going to be required of you were you elected, what would make you immune from becoming beholden to the lobbyists and the fundraisers, the same way you're suggesting that?
Well, you're suggesting I'm just going to be just like everybody else down there, but I'm not.
Well,
So,
I guess
I'm a
asking,
new kind of Republican. I
you
hope to make the
seem
Republican
like-
Party a different kind of Republican Party.
you seem like a
Yeah.
realist, so
Yeah.
then how would you raise money to get reelected if you didn't? I mean, how are you raising money now, actually?
I raise money through individuals. I raise money because people find our message extremely appealing. And that's how I raise money. I'm not going to raise money from a special interest group in this election, because I haven't yet. And but just because somebody supports and endorses me, by no means do I support or endorse them.
That's reasonable. In your fundraising, are you finding that what percentage of your campaign donations are coming from individuals versus large groups or large donors?
What do you mean by large donors?
$5,000. Is
Oh.
that the limit, is it 5 or 10
I guess
for the Senate?
it's
I guess
2,600.
26.
Yeah, I think we put out something just recently.
Yeah, I can get that to
You
you.
get
It
the
might be
sale.
like 70 or something like
It's
that.
like 70%.
Under $500.
70% of the donors are like $100 or less. It's like something like that. Might be 65 or 70% or something.
I'm sorry, I'm
Thursday,
calling the table.
No, but it's a significant. You spend a day on the campaign trail with me, and you'll see just the enthusiasm, the reception we're getting. And it's not obviously just from Republicans, because there's only 11% registered voters here that are Republicans. So it's from Democrats and Independents. You know, we were in Winchester on Saturday. I ran the 5K there, and then was part of Winchester Day. Spent a couple hours there. People coming up, mostly Democrats, Independents. We were in West Roxbury for the 5K run yesterday as well. Ran that. And,
So you're keeping fit, are you?
we run a race every Saturday and every Sunday.
Oh my goodness.
But I'm I'm a SEAL, so I'm usually more used to marathons. So these 5Ks and 10Ks aren't. But then we went to Dorchester and marched in the Dorchester Day Parade. And obviously Dorchester is not a Republican hotbed, but not that there's any areas that are Republican hotbeds.
Well, Cohasset might
sure.
be, yeah, just not sure it is. Yeah.
Well, Cohasset's got its parts that vote Republican more than they do Democrat. But we're in Dorchester yesterday, and it is wide, diverse group of people that are coming up to us during the parade, and just espousing just how excited they are and how they're going to support us, and how they're Democrats and Independents. Some of them have never ever voted Republican, even during Scott Brown's special election and his 2012 election. They'd never voted Republican before. So, and that's why our donor base is the way it is, and that's why our message is resonating, and that's why I feel great about where we are.
So you talked about the economy and wanting to go to Washington. What measures specifically do you endorse for transforming the economy? It's been very sluggish, this recovery, and not seeing a whole lot of movement. Unemployment, they're saying, is around 6.5%, but that doesn't count all of the long-term unemployed.
Right.
So what's your
I think
plan?
there's 3 things that you can do when you get down to DC to stimulate this economy.
Mm-hmm.
And the first one is obviously you got to repeal the medical device tax,
Mm-hmm.
the Affordable Care Act. Especially here in Massachusetts, where you've got the #1 export coming out of Massachusetts is medical devices. You have a 2.4% or 2.3% excise tax on medical device manufacturers. That just has to be repealed. You got hundreds of companies here that are medical device manufacturers. You've got over 25,000 employees that are dependent on these companies for employment. The second one is, I think you need to have a comprehensive tax reform, and that's on the corporate level as well as on the personal side. On the corporate level, you can close a number of corporate loopholes, and you've got to get the corporate tax rate below 35%, where it is now. Right now, the U.S. has one of the highest corporate tax rates of all the industrialized nations out there. President Obama even supports a corporate tax rate. I think he's out there with 28%. Lower taxes equals more jobs. Higher taxes equals less jobs. And that would stimulate the economy. I also think that you can have more of the free trade agreements. We just had a free trade agreement with Colombia less than a year ago, and our governor, to his credit, went down to Colombia within the last few months. We have a lot of goods and services that can be exported out of Massachusetts. We need more markets to be able to penetrate those. Of course, with any free trade agreement, you have to have labor have a seat at the table and have a voice, and it'd be a fair trade agreement. But I think we could have more trade agreements. I think those 3 areas, those 3 measures right there, would stimulate the economy, and specifically here in Massachusetts.
Now, what about sequestration? We're starting to see the effects of it now.
Yeah,
and that was a bipartisan.
Sequestration is a perfect example of how dysfunctional and broken DC is. What they basically did is they balled up a virus and mailed it to themselves, thinking it was never going to arrive. Literally thinking it was never going to come in the mail. And what happened? It came in the mail. Why? Because they couldn't work together. And some of the effects of the sequestration are having real world effects. There is, I mean, there's a number of effects, obviously. One that was just recently in the news this weekend. They're going to start furloughing, 1 day a week for like 11 weeks, workers down at Walter Reed Hospital. Now this is the major hospital. I mean, you got one of the major hospitals where you have the wounded and the injured coming back from overseas deployments in a hostile area. And I just can't, it's one of the most unconscionable things you can even think of, to start furloughing there, because that's what they depend on for their care, for their rehab. Some of them are actually getting rehab to go back out and serve again, because that's how bad they want to go back out and join their teammates. The other one is, you've got an aircraft carrier that's supposed to deploy this summer that is not able to deploy now. Now, when you only have 11 aircraft carriers and you're losing 1/10, or basically 1/11, basically 10% of your force in terms of being able to show and exert force around the world, that's also unconscionable. Because what's the first question the president asks when anything happens in the world in terms of national security? He or she always asks, what are the aircraft carriers? And now you're going to have one less aircraft carrier. So there's a number of examples, like the sequestration. I mean, you should be able to find 2.4% cut, be able to cut 2.4% of any part of the government, quite frankly. Families and businesses have been having to do much more than that over the last few years. But to do it in such a capricious and thoughtless way is now coming back to bite them, because they didn't think of it in a thoughtful way. If you want to cut in the military, well, there's smarter ways to cut in the military. If you want to cut in other areas, there's just more smart and more efficient ways to cut. You don't just make it so that, well, you have it as a political headline in the news to highlight just how bad and dumb the way they did their cuts come about. So I think it's just a perfect example of how broken things are.
So you would work with the Gang of Eight to
Oh, absolutely.
repeal sequestration?
Well, the Gang of Eight's with the immigration reform.
Well,
But
they've tried to work on sequestration initially.
Yeah, I think there's definitely ways to cut 2.4%. If you can't cut 2.4% right now, I don't know how you're going to deal with, because right now we have interest rates about as low as they come. So in order to service this almost $17 trillion in debt, think of it as like when a mortgage teaser calls you on the phone and says, hey, I can get you a mortgage rate for 1%. Well, of course you can buy a bigger house. But when that teaser rate expires and you're going to be paying 3, 5, 7%, well, that's what's going to happen to our national debt. So being able to service that debt right now, we're at a very fortunate point in terms of the interest rate cycle. But interest rates can't go anywhere but up. Depends. The question is when they're going to start going up. And right now, obviously, Fed with its QE has been keeping them low. But eventually they're going to go up. If you can't deal with 2.4% cuts right now, I don't know how you're going to deal with bigger cuts down the road, because in order to service that debt, a number of things need to happen, but you need to be able to get to some cuts in all departments of the government. So I think they're going to come on the sequestration. They're going to come around finally and realize that they didn't think about this in a very thoughtful way. A, because they didn't think that virus and that bottle wasn't going to come back in the mail. They thought it was just going to stay out in sea, float around for Robinson Crusoe a few hundred years from now.
You were mentioning previously about bipartisanship and how a lot of these days in the Senate you have to get to 60 votes to get things passed. What do you think you would bring as one of 100 overall, one of, I believe it would be maybe 46 Republicans? Forgive me if my numbers are off.
It's 55-45 right
Okay,
now,
so
but I believe there's 50, I think there's 45 Republicans.
So you'd be 46. What will you be able to bring to the table to help move that process along and help more things get to 60?
Sure. I mean, I think one of the things that I would bring to the table is I respect the other side. I have a very open mind. And that's the only way you're going to get things done. If you don't understand, or at least respect and be willing to work with the other side, it's never going to happen. I think there's too many people down there that literally won't even listen to the other side. And until we get more people that are actually, there's so many issues that, look, both sides could have very, very valid points, but they can also find some common ground. I think two smart people can agree, or can agree to disagree on a number of issues, but as long as they're respectful and they understand and they respect the other side and are willing to listen, you're gonna get more things done. Right now, we have too few people that are willing to even acknowledge and talk to the other side. I bet you there's a number of senators down there that probably won't even talk to each other, because they're from different parties.
And where do you think the best opportunities are, and what are your ideas in those areas where you think there's good opportunities?
I think the first things that we need to focus on when we get down, I mean, there's a number of obviously important issues when we get down. We got to work on the economy, and that's, I've mentioned the 3 things that I think we should do on that. But I think this immigration reform bill, it's not going to be built on before I get down there, and it's going to take, getting more people from my side on board on that, and even some of the conservative Democrats are going to need to come on board on that as well. I passed the Senate Judiciary Committee, but now it's in front of the Senate. There's amendments being presented, and they're going to be voting on that before it gets to the House. So, I have a pretty unique perspective on immigration. I'm the oldest son of 2 Colombian immigrants. I didn't learn English until I went to school. I grew up in a migrant valley, and I just think that we've talked about this issue for far too long. It's not a moral issue anymore, it's an economic issue. And I think that if you don't do anything, that's effectively amnesty, if you just have the status quo. And so I think that nobody wants amnesty. Well, I shouldn't say nobody, there's probably some people that want amnesty, but the reality is most people agree with what the Group of 8 is trying to do. And for that Group of 8 or for the rest of the senators not to come together on an issue that is this vital, that would actually help the economy too. You can have a lot more workers. It's going to be a lengthy process, but you're going to be adding workers to the workforce. You're going to be adding people that are going to be starting businesses, hiring people. It's just it's a trickle down of doing this. So that's one issue. The expanded background check that had only 54 senators vote for it, and only 4 Republicans. That's never going to pass unless it gets more bipartisan support. And it's never going to pass unless you get more Republicans to come on board, and also hopefully more conservative Democrats as well. And so, I just bring to the table something completely different than my opponent, and that is respecting the other side and being able to work across the aisle. And I'm not tied to any special interest group, so when I agree with the special interest group, they may see me voting with them, but when I disagree with them, just like the NRA on the expanded background check, I'll tell them to get lost. I don't need them. I think it's better to get something like that done.
Does that mean that you won't sign the Norquist pledge?
No. There's only one pledge that I take, and that's the same pledge I took when I was a Navy SEAL officer, the same pledge my parents took when they became citizens, and that's just protect and defend the Constitution. That's the only pledge I take, the only pledge I make to people in Massachusetts. The only reason politicians make pledges, which just makes me laugh, is because nobody trusts them. So they figure they got to take a pledge. That's the only pledge I take. I'm not signing any other pledge. No new tax, no Norquist pledge, no other kind of pledge.
I'm curious about one of the things the president and members of his party talk a lot about is infrastructure spending, increased infrastructure spending, and I'm wondering where you stand on that. Do you think it's something we should be putting more money into?
Yeah, well, I mean, we definitely need to repair and upgrade and build more, obviously. So, when I drive in from the South Shore, you drive into certain areas, and you can see where you need a lot more work on the highways and bridges that have been around for forever. You saw the bridge in Washington State, where I grew up, and that bridge collapsed. And so that's just a perfect example of, we definitely need more investment on infrastructure. I think it's silly not to, but I think there's ways that you can get to that without having to. The first reaction shouldn't always be to raise taxes to fund any of these projects. I think you need to invest more in education, obviously. I think we need to invest more in making sure that the 2 million people that have served our military since 9/11 and deployed overseas in a hostile area come back and they have the right benefits available to them in terms of health care. And hope they're able to transition to the civilian sector when they get out of the military. There's a lot of great areas that we need to invest more in. But I think government has gotten to a size where I think we can find areas in all parts of the government where we can trim and be able to fund things like that. A comprehensive tax reform would help that as well. Companies can start hiring, you got more taxpayers, you get more tax revenue. So,
do you think through, when you say comprehensive tax reform, your website also says, yes, we have to close loopholes, yes, you
Yep.
know, let's just get a tax rate that's down. Is your assumption that if we get it to 28% or 27% or whatever the magic number is, and we close the loopholes that let companies like Apple, you know, divert $1 billion to Ireland, and not pay taxes to it here, will that actually put more money into corporations? I've never quite understood the equation of what the tax loopholes are allowing them versus
Well, what it's going to enable, them to do is obviously the lower the tax rate, the more money they're going to have to reinvest in their people, to reinvest in their company, to reinvest in R&D.
But if we close all those loopholes, we're taking away.
Yeah, but in the end, a lower tax rate is going to generate, lower taxes overall is going to be more jobs. It's going to be more capital for them to invest in themselves, in their people, in R&D, and to hire more people because they're going to be growing more. And that in the end is going to be more efficient than I think anything. And there's a number of corporate tax loopholes. I mean, there's a couple of them, you know, they can write off these corporate jets. There's another one that just was recently done where, you know, Hollywood gets like a $500 million credit. There's another special interest group right there. There's just a number of them that are out there that you can close, and that effectively enables you to be able to lower the corporate tax rate. Corporate tax rate, you know, when I go around every day talking to small businesses, the main thing they're concerned about is that they're just overtaxed, overregulated, and have to deal with all the compliance. But more and more of anything, they won't, you know, they need a lower tax rate. You know, and the ones that compete internationally, obviously that's more, you know, it affects them even more. But the other ones that just compete here domestically, of course, they'd rather have more money so they can invest in their businesses. They invest in their business, they got more R&D, they have more technology, they're more competitive, they can go out there and expand into other markets, they can hire more people. That's just a smart thing to do.
Now, something that's near and dear to my heart, and probably to yours with 4 kids, student loan debt.
Yeah.
It's quadrupled in the past decade. And I haven't heard anybody in Congress really address the student loan bubble. You know, they've talked about lowering or maintaining the interest rate on federal loans, but that's just a small piece of the pie. Do you have any ideas for addressing it?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be, I mean, it's almost on the cusp of $1 trillion. It could be the next bust or the next implosion that's going to be equivalent almost to our housing bust that we had. And I do think that the first thing we need to do, though, is maintain the interest rate at 3.4%. I just think you do. I don't agree with the plan that I read somewhere where the Republicans were proposing something where it was tied to a variable rate.
Right.
Because in the end, that rate, like I said, rates are about as low as they come. So in the end, that rate could actually have students paying significantly more. And what you have right now is that you've got students graduating from college in a very weak anemic recovery, where there is a very high unemployment rate among college-educated kids, or college graduates. It's in like the low 20s. And the average college student now has about $25,000 in debt. So couple a big debt like that, where a lot of them have to come home and live with their parents, or put a tenant in an apartment, and be looking for jobs that are not even anywhere commensurate with their education or hopefully their skill level. And so there's, you know, I've read parts of Senator Warren's. I think that's just way too low, tying it to whatever rate you want to tie it to, but it's effectively, I think, the same rate that banks get to borrow at, which is like less than 1%. I mean, it's basically free. I don't think that's a wise thing to do. I think you keep it at 3.4% and you keep it fair. I think what we need to do with students, we need to make sure that these companies can start hiring again, personally, and they can hire them at the levels that, you know, that they're educated for, instead of having to go out there and, you know, try to get a minimum job wage or a minimum wage job that they're overly qualified for.
But what about all of these colleges and universities who get federal grants? Should the government ask them to maybe curb tuition rates?
I think we do need to find a way to, because the 2 rates that are growing the fastest in this country are tuition rates and healthcare costs.
Right.
And we've addressed partly in an attempt, at least attempted to start curbing healthcare costs. I don't think they did it the right way. But I think you need to have some similar plan in dealing with tuition costs, because right now, it doesn't matter where you go to school, whether it's an Ivy League or another kind of, another grade school, you're still paying, I'm not sure how old your kids are, but.
Right, one of one in college.
Okay, so, I mean, you might be paying $50,000 for a kid to go to school.
I wish.
So you have to pay more. So I'm just saying, it's just, what's that?
No, not more.
Okay,
No,
well,
I
I'm
mean,
just saying,
when-
but
when
it's
UMass
$26,000
Amherst is $26,000 a year,
but still, that's crazy.
not possible for a lot of
$26,000.
families.
Yeah, and because what's happening right now, and the reason this is such an important issue, and it actually starts at a younger level of education, which is why I think there needs to be a big focus on education and more choice for the parents. And I give Governor Patrick a lot of credit for increasing the number of charter schools here in the state, because the rest of the world is educating their kids at a great level, at a very high level. And this world is getting more and more competitive every day that we go forward. In order for our kids to be able to compete in this increasingly competitive global environment, they're going to need to have a good education. There's such a difference between kids who go to college and kids who don't go to college. Now, I don't say that every kid has to go to college, or a lot of kids, college isn't their thing. But there's a lot of good trade schools out there too. There's a lot of good opportunities where kids can go out and learn a great trade and have a very good career. But you can't price it so that, and I'm not talking about trade schools, I'm talking about universities and colleges, you can't continue to price these so that every kid isn't having the opportunity to go to college, that wants to go to college. Like I look at my kids, they're 13, 12, 10, and 8, they're young, and I wish I was playing Little League baseball still. And, but I also look on the other side, knowing what's coming forward and knowing how competitive this world is, and in a way I'm glad I'm not a kid right now. Because this world is so competitive. It's competitive for kids that are my kids' age, and it's competitive for kids your kids' age. And we're only hurting ourselves by limiting the opportunities for our kids to go to school.
I just want to be clear. Are you saying you would favor or work toward some type of federal, either regulation or guidelines for universities that receive federal grants?
I think there should be a
based on
critical,
tuition?
I think there should be some way to work towards a plan to be able to start curbing the increase in tuition costs. As I said, the increase every year is significant. And I know that some